around the world, really Russia and China is what she's talking about here. Those adversaries favor control, corruption, and conformity, whereas she and her government fights for freedom, responsibility, enterprise, and tolerance. So everybody should be feeling very good about that. She went on to talk then about the new elections bill, about plans to introduce photo identification in polling stations, about the elections bill, which is going to work to protect everyone against political intimidation, that they're going to modernize existing counter-espionage laws to reflect the modern threat and legislative standards. These proposals, she said, will create new offences, tools and powers to detect, deter and disrupt hostile activity targeting the UK. They're going to seek views on Official Secrets Act reforms, so they're going to shut down any whistleblowing. They're going to push forward their groundbreaking online safety legislation. And the UK is doing this in two ways, she said. First, through cross-government counter-disinformation unit to lead the fight against online misinformation and disinformation. And secondly, through legislation. So all this legislation is coming through. She didn't mention the crime and policing bill, which of course she should have. But all this legislation is all about defending democracy. So, of course, on Monday evening, we had Boris Johnson's announcement about the extension to lockdown for another 4 weeks. Well, that was a live stream that was pushed out, but there was no statement made to Parliament. And the Speaker was pretty upset about this, Lindsay Hoyle. He was pretty upset about this, and this is what he had to say.
First of all, can I say I'm grateful to both gentlemen for giving notice of the point of order. I've repeatedly made it clear how important it is that announcements should be made in this chamber first. As you are both aware, the Secretary of State will be making a statement at 8:30 on COVID. That will give members of the House an opportunity to question him on the government's policy. However, it is not what I would have expected. A statement to the House before announcement to the press is not acceptable. The government determines when ministers make statements, but in doing so, they must show respect to this House. Can I just say, we weren't going to get a statement until I got involved with Downing Street. The fact is, this has been forced to actually get a statement today. It was going to be left to tomorrow, which would have been totally unacceptable. I was told no decisions have been taken. That's why I'm more shocked to know there is an embargoed list of what's going to happen to this country without this House knowing. I was told no decisions have been taken, that no decisions will be taken until the Cabinet meets. The fact is, I am being misled, this House is being misled, it is not acceptable, and I would welcome them coming here before they make the press statement, as the press have already got an embargo. And I'm sure now that the Whip is texting the Chief Whip to let him know exactly what's being said, because it's disappointing to all of us. I'm now suspending the House.
So what basically happened was that Boris had scheduled a live stream to make the announcement. A press release had gone out to the press, which was embargoed until that live stream had taken place. Parliament hadn't been given any kind of briefing, and so Lindsay Hoyle stepped in and forced Matt Hancock to go in and make a statement to Parliament. But Alex, this is an incredible situation. I mean, we've seen it building over a period of time here, and really the John Adams quote at the very beginning of Chloe's speech is absolutely prescient here, because we have a Parliament that thinks that it ought to be God. We have a government which is behaving like it is God, and neither of them is actually correct, because both their attitudes are way over the top. So, democracy in the UK has ceased to exist effectively because we have a government which is behaving like it is
a dictatorship.
Well, it is a dictatorship, and Parliament doesn't know actually what its position is relevant to that dictatorship. So how do we move forward from this point?
By the outlawing of political parties, for which no common law country was ever set up, and by a hazard which the US founding fathers and the equivalent statesmen of that era in Britain and Ireland were very keen to point out, that the returning of members to Parliament by free and fair elections, as enunciated in the Bill of Rights 1688 and the Claim of Right in Scotland, is absolutely not negotiable. It's not up for grabs. And I recently heard even continental commentators, Rainer Füllmich and his German associates, pointing out, because some of them are forming another German party, which is the best they can hope to do in their system at present. You can't vote for independence there. They are starting to realize, even in the continental system that has been blind to this, that a party, by definition, is something that interposes, comes between the voter and his government. And the whole point of a representative in Parliament is that he is you in Parliament saying, we will not have this. This is the key, the kernel of what we have been teasing out in A Dissident's Guide to the Constitution. Go to ukcolumn.org and from the top menu, find under the topics menu, the Constitution button, and go through that series. It would be remiss of me also not to point out that the final stage of laws that are passed, when they get through these awful rounds of spin doctors that Mr. Hoyle has got so enraged about now, the final hurdle is that the sovereign, embodying our sovereignty under law, is meant to sign assent, a royal assent. And she hasn't done so, thanks to one of our viewers who's done research with the House of Lords about this. In fact, none of our predecessors have since 1854. Since the early Victorian era, a committee of lords, which now is merging with that spin doctor blob as far as we can see, verbally claims that the Queen has assented. Royal signatures are not actually appended. So the tripartite system of government fell even at that age, which is about the same time that whipped parties came into the lead. So the long and the short of it is we must have independent candidates in Parliament. Otherwise, we just are on a hiding to nothing again. This vicious cycle will repeat itself, as Mr. Adams predicted.
Yes, indeed.
I'll just add one comment to that. People are often asked who is running the show. Well, clearly it isn't Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is in the position that he's in due to the support given to the Conservative Party. So follow the money trail. Who was paid for the Conservative Party? Who was paid for Boris Johnson's leadership? It comes down to this money trail, and this is the same for all of the parties.
Okay, Alex. Now this is from the Crime Bodge website, YouTube channel. Sorry, and it was published at the end of May. But the title is "Man Gets 5 Years for Having three lawful books and the wrong views."
We can see something of the decay in the legal system here, mirroring what you said about Parliament. Crime Bodge is a YouTube channel well worth subscribing to, and two of these cases have been covered in rapid succession by it, which is why I've put them up now. They both involve a new generation of Crown prosecutors, as they are in England and Wales. The Crown Office in Scotland is the equivalent that we've covered more of the nefarious business of, but the CPS in England and Wales is just as bad by this stage. They and a new generation of judges who became Queen's Counsel in the post-Blair reforms. They had to jump through a hoop of quangos to tick boxes to get into to be a judge. Now, this new generation is reinterpreting some of the legislation just before the turn of the millennium, particularly those regarding malicious communications and misuse of computers. And they're starting at the fringes. If they think they can get away with plastering someone as a neo-Nazi, they're going to start using this legislation, which was basically came through in the 80s and 90s in a fit of horror, that technology was allowing people to become stalkers and cheerleaders for terrorists, which something must be done, and unspecified. So a vague legislation went in. The second generation since then has got such empty minds, or such repurposed minds, they are starting to use the provisions of this 20 to 30-year-old legislation in ways that we hadn't envisaged. But let's have a look at the relevant section of law that's at issue here. It's even from before 9/11. It's the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2000. If you've been through a British airport or port, you will know that this is displayed. A different section of this law is what's displayed, saying if you don't tell the police at this desk everything they want to know for hours, including intimate details, they will lock you up as a terrorist. And if you don't give them the password to your devices, you'll be a convicted terrorist. Well, you might like to read the whole of Article Section 58. It's the very vagueness of it which is so concerning here. This has got a man sent to jail for 5 years now, as we're about to see, for owning 3 downloads, legal downloads, by the way.
Well, I'm not going to read it all, Alex, because we are heading out of time. People can read that for themselves, but it does begin: a person commits an offence if he collects or makes a record of information of a kind likely to be useful to a person committing or preparing an act of terrorism if he possesses a document or record containing information of that kind, or if the person views or otherwise accesses by means of the internet a document or record containing information of that kind, and so on. But this is typical of Parliament, of legislative language, that it leaves many diverse ways to expand the scope.
It's one of these clauses of recent legislation that reverses the burden of proof and doesn't have a reasonable defence clause in it, which for anyone, even amateur involved in the law, will know is a no-no. It's not how the common law works. It's not even how the better civil law jurisdictions work these days. But let's look at the convicting judge in this case, Peter Lodder, QC, a resident judge at Kingston upon Thames Crown Court. In sentencing the man involved, he said the following, addressing Nicholas Brock, the defendant, in sentencing remarks. He said, "It is clear from the material found on your computer and your hard drive that you are a right-wing extremist." Well, one of the things that sentence indicates to us is that it is a jailable offence to be a right-wing extremist. I'm not sure when that went through Parliament, or has it just gone through the BBC? And he continued to say, "Methinks the judge doth protest too much here. I do not sentence you for your political views, but the extremity of those views informs," which is posh language for dictates, "the assessment of dangerousness." So a judge can't send a man to prison for having the wrong views, but he can send him to prison for appearing dangerous. Now, Mr. Warner, who is the legal advisor and commentator running the Crime Bodge channel, has had this to say in the video which I put up on screen. He says the most repulsive of all this is book burning by backdoor political censorship. But, and this is a departure from Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, Mr. Warner says rather than burn the book, they choose to burn the reader instead, they here being the new generation of Crown prosecutors. Section 58 of the Prevention of Terrorism Act 2000 does not require reasonable suspicion. Even people who have a run-in with traffic police will know that reasonable suspicion is a cornerstone of the common law in police powers terms. They don't require reasonable suspicion that an article, so in this case a download, has a purpose connected to terrorist activity. It's only likely to be useful to bad people. Right? And he continues, Rob Warner continues, the burden of proof also falls upon the defendant here to show that they had a reasonable excuse for having this article, in this case download, in their possession. So this is the law turned on its head, but it's been the case for 21 years now, a generation. Nobody seems to have bothered to protest about it much. And Mr. Warner concludes that Section 58 of this Act 2000 is so widely drawn, it enables the police, and they have started doing it now, that's the new development, to arrest anyone who purchases a particular book or download. So just as it's a kind of secondary matter to inform Parliament of how long we're going to be locked up, likewise it's a secondary matter to put before MPs a draft and say, would you mind awfully putting this into law so we can lock up the dissidents? Because that can all be short-circuited through the right kind of prosecutor and judge and cowed jury. Because, of course, this will have gone through a jury who will have sat there like sheep, if we don't get into trouble for putting it that way, and will have been directed by the judge, as Brian, you have seen happen personally in courtrooms, will have been directed, this is a bad man, you must convict him. Now, the other case which has been covered at the same time by Crime Bodge is the video that got this man jailed for 18 months. This is a man who, at the time of the ostensible offence, was just 22 in Yorkshire, Louis Duxbury. There had been a terrorist attack, real or otherwise, or whatever you want to call it. He had said he was outraged by it in a video, and the reason the cassette is the thumbnail icon for that video is that they still use the cassettes for this purpose, the police interview tapes. And the thing that I think people ought to bear in mind when they go and listen to that commentary is that the bogeyman that was put up in this case was the Muslims will be terribly offended. Now, right through the probation service and the prison service and whatnot, Mr. Duxbury was repeatedly intimidated by British officials, white British officials, by being threatened with being pummeled by Muslims or being put in front of Muslims and called a bad, nasty man. And in one case described there by Crime Bodge, he was put in a small room with an imam, I think one imam known to the prison and probation service, and told, well, go and explain yourself to the imam. And Mr. Duxbury said, hello, Mr. Imam, let me civilly explain to you what I did in this video. The imam said, I see. Thank you for telling me. At which point the probation officer yelled, no, don't talk at the imam, listen to him, get yourself re-educated. And this continues through the probation service, where, of course, he's not allowed to record. And he's told, recognize that your skin color is part of the problem. You have white privilege. So the problem is not just wretched law, it's that we're the second generation into having tolerated wretched law, and now a much worse caliber of mind-controlled and repurposed people start applying it against political enemies, starting at the margins. And they've actually gone against